or DFI. The DFC itself as an agency was actually created in the last several years. In 2020 was the official start date for DFC. However, there were predecessor agencies and parts of the U.S. government that existed long before that, doing a lot of the same kind of development finance work, investing in projects, again, in developing markets. That includes the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, or OPIC, as well as an arm within USAID, the bilateral donor agency of the U.S. government that did partial credit guarantees. They were known as the Development Credit Authority. Those two entities effectively were merged in 2020. A variety of new instruments and other sort of modernizing tools were implemented to create the new DFC in 2020. And that is, who we are as an agency now today. At a high level, our mission really is to partner with the private sector, in particular, to finance solutions to some of the most critical challenges facing developing markets today. I'll get into a little bit more detail about what that means, but also encourage you to ask more specific questions around what would be relevant for what you invest in and contemplate on your end, and certainly happy to answer in more detail on those elements. So a bit more about DFC's focus and the prominence of and importance of the impact of the work that we do as a development finance institution. So I'll use this term maybe a couple of times, or you'll hear me say it or mention it or allude to it a couple of times throughout the presentation here. But mobilizing private sector investment, and I mentioned again an explicit focus on the private sector previously, that's core to what we do. Doing so in the markets I mentioned, with a prioritization actually for low-income and lower-middle-income countries. So that's as defined by the World Bank definition for low-income and lower-middle-income, and of course underserved communities. Things like financial inclusion efforts and other elements relate very directly to that last point. The other, I think, component here that's quite important, and frankly in alignment with a lot of our European and multilateral investment colleagues, is focus and a grounding really in transparency and high standards for the investment work that we do. That sort of runs the gamut of what that could mean. We do very rigorous upfront environmental and social analyses of any of the projects that we're contemplating investing in. We also track their impact over the life of our transactions. Let me move here to the next slide. So a bit about our offerings. Some of these are tools or instruments that predecessor agencies, either OPIC or the Development Credit Authority that I mentioned before, have offered for a long time. Debt financing is a key component of our historical offering, whether that's a direct loan, a credit guarantee. That has been core to what we do. Where I sit within DFC, I oversee the credit portfolio for Africa within the DFC. And again, that makes up the bulk of our historical work and our current portfolio. Equity investments is actually a brand new instrument. Brand new maybe isn't the right terminology now, 3 years into it, but relative to the history of OPIC and DFC now, relatively new, and a part of the modernization effort for DFC. So DFC now has the capability to deploy equity, whether directly into companies or projects, or through our fund-of-funds window to emerging fund managers, which you can see here as an offering, the investment funds component, a couple over to the right. We also offer feasibility studies now. Again, this is a new instrument. That and technical assistance on the far right were new tools that were developed as a way to really expand and I guess really deepen our ability to support projects across the sectors that we focus in, and helping to really accelerate the growth and development of those companies and projects to ensure the maximum development impact that we can have. And then the last one here is political risk insurance, which is actually another historically, I guess, well-seasoned instrument and offering. I think it was actually the very first instrument that OPIC was able to offer, and so continues to be a large portion of our activity and portfolio. Just moving to the next slide here. Just taking a moment. Great. So geographically, where is our portfolio concentrated? You can see here exactly where that stands as of the most recent calculations that we have available. Again, this is total exposure. These are total exposure figures that you're looking at. A bit of context here, at least geographically, the evolution that we've seen. So you can see Western Hemisphere makes up the largest concentration. Historically, that's been the case, I think, for one, if not 2 decades. It's been a pretty reliably high volume, both in terms of transaction number, but dollar volume as well, component of the portfolio. But we've seen recently, with the emphasis at the broader U.S. government policy level, within the development community in particular, also within the foreign policy community, that focus on sub-Saharan Africa, through initiatives like the Prosper Africa Initiative. We're seeing a lot of growth in that specific portfolio. I believe, don't quote me exactly on the numbers, but somewhere between 5 to 6 billion is where the exposure stood at when I came over to DFC in 2020. So we've seen some pretty substantial growth there in the last few years, and expect to see more. Where I sit, obviously covering the region, the deal flow is absolutely there, and there is much more than what we can actually do and execute just based on the people we have. So expect to see that growth broadly, but especially within sub-Saharan Africa. So here are just a couple of key features, and I'd actually encourage you to take a quick look at our website. There's a helpful, more detailed sort of set of eligibility criteria, and actually